Of all the franchises to have been made over the last 20 years, I'm quick to say that Assassin's Creed is my favorite. I've thoroughly embraced the mythos that is Ubisoft's hodgepodge of alternative history and science fiction, even through the series' ups and downs. After spending years locked in a very specific way of doing things, Assassin's Creed Origins served as a massive overhaul of Creed's traditional formula, shifting away from near-linear storytelling in a sandbox environment to a loot-driven open-world playground. Not only did New Creed blow open the franchise's scope, it offered a surprisingly deep dive into the culture of each game's time and place, to such a degree that both Origins and Odyssey got the edutainment-themed Discovery Tour add-ons. The 13-year-old version of me who had to make do with Encarta 95 would have had his mind blown over this. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is another opportunity for virtual tourism as you relive a major moment in history in which Norsemen from Scandinavian countries invaded, pillaged, and eventually settled England in the 860s. Valhalla tells the tale of Eivor the Wolf-Kissed, who survived the childhood trauma of seeing her, or his, parents butchered in the middle of a feast to celebrate the merging of her family's clan. Eivor earned a warrior's place among her adopted family and grew close to her stepbrother, Sigurd, who is next in line for succession. After being denied this birthright, Sigurd convinces Eivor to join him in the long journey to England, where the great heathen army has since settled. Along the way, he introduces his stepsister to his newest allies, a pair of assassins also headed to England to fight against the Order of the Ancients' growing influence. Gifted with the hidden blade, and used in a rather unconventional manner, Eivor offers her assistance in eliminating the Order's presence so long as it aligns with Sigurd's plans to strike up alliances. Meanwhile, in the present day, we find Layla Hassan at her lowest point following the events that concluded her chapter in Odyssey. After Abstergo's Sigma team decimated her assassin cell, she has fled to New England with Sean Hastings and Rebecca Crane, where Eivor's remains have been uncovered. She struggles with the influence caused by the Staff of Hermes she acquired in Atlantis, an artifact that made her irritable and driven to mood swings. As Earth copes with strange anomalies, growing earthquakes, and a certain respiratory virus, Layla once again goes into the past so that she may help her future.
Bring your own metal ingots. I cannot forge them from empty air.
Those who have spent 60 or more hours with Origins and Odyssey already know what to expect out of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. In fact, so much of Valhalla feels eerily reminiscent of Odyssey that you might wonder if you're playing a reskinned version of the 2018 game. Dropped into an open-world environment with few roadblocks, you're given free reign over a large swath of English territories occupied by villages, towns, ruins, and forts that are friendly to or suspicious of Eivor's presence. Quests give your immigration to England a purpose, and like other games, they're organized by faction and major story events. Valhalla's quest system was confusing at first because once you reach England, it front-loads a lot of settlement activities that can only be completed the longer you play. Tasks like recovering all of the Assassin's Codex pages or even eliminating the Order of the Ancients is impossible to do from the start. What the game should have done was place a stronger, more noticeable emphasis on forging alliances by pledging aid to other clans. Considering that pledges are where the main missions come from, making it more obvious to pursue them would have saved me some time at the start. Although few artificial animus-generated barriers prevent you from going wherever you want, the different kingdoms that make up the eastern side of England are marked by power levels that denote the expected difficulty of its defenders. Character development is solely based on experience points and a massive skill tree that offers lots of options to customize Eivor's abilities and make her strong enough to conquer these harder areas. All of the different gameplay systems, stealth, open warfare, exploration, work just as well as they did before, and it's still great to have so many options at your disposal. Something that these new Creed games were really great at was giving the player the freedom to engage the enemy through stealth or open combat without penalty. Stealth kills are always satisfying, especially after learning to create traps that lure, cause distractions, and set up assassinations. What I found kind of annoying about stealth is that you can't use your Raven to mark targets the same way Cassandra and Bayek could do in their games. In fact, your Raven partner is kind of useless overall, as it won't identify targets, only show you the general area where they might be. Tracking targets has been replaced with a pinging system that will mark enemies in red, allowing you to see them whether they're standing out in the open or inside houses and huts. Look, as fun as stealth is, sometimes you might find yourself feeling the warrior's thirst for battle, and Valhalla's combat system is happy to oblige. Combat has gotten better in these recent games, and I'm especially happy with how it was implemented in Valhalla. Compared to the grace and acrobatic style of fighting in Odyssey, I love that Ivor's fighting style is heavier, grittier, and far more physical. There's no Ezio level finesse here, just ugly brawling that looks great and intimidating in action. This is one area actually where the sound design is really effective at establishing tone, as axes thud loudly against shields until they burst into splinters. Ivor can fight using all manner of different weapons, like hand axes, bows, and two-handed spears, and something I noticed after about 20 hours playing the game is that there seems to be fewer of them. I actually don't mind this, because I always found it annoying that in Odyssey or Origins, you'd be inundated with new gear and either have to anguish over which to use, spend a lot of time dismantling, or selling stuff off. Whichever weapon you find in favor, Ivor's attacks are governed by stamina that is affected by how often she swings, dodges, and even the total weight of her gear. Should her stamina drain completely, Ivor's ability to fight is significantly reduced, making her attacks slow and unable to dodge until enough stamina has been regenerated. Learning how to effectively parry attacks is a great way to ensure your continued survival, especially against major boss encounters. Every Saxon soldier you fight easily broadcasts their attacks, and getting the timing right for a parry means they'll be left staggered and open for an attack and finishing move. Parrying is a little tricky to learn at first given the timing involved, but it is worth mastering because of the breathing room it provides. See, Valhalla enjoys pitting you against multiple enemies at once, and even on the normal difficulty setting, enemies hit surprisingly hard. If you're not paying attention to stamina, using rations, or making full use of Ivor's moveset, you may end up seeing a lot of game over screens. Ivor's effectiveness in battle is also determined by how points are spent in skills. Modeled after star constellations, the skills menu is a large web-like network of nodes that expand to other constellations in every direction. Dropping points in these nodes grants incremental boosts in damage resistances, both physical and elemental, stealth attacks, carrying weight, bonuses to armor sets, and health. At the center of each star pattern is a passive skill that offers fun new options like chaining multiple assassinations, creating elaborate traps from dead bodies, cause damage on a successful parry, and guide arrows mid-flight. The close cousin to the skill menu are abilities that can be mapped to the controller's face buttons and require adrenaline to trigger. Some of these abilities are also really fun, like a harpoon you can launch at someone and then swing that poor fool at his allies and damage them all at once. Unlike the skill points that are doled out each time Ivor levels up, which is very quickly and a lot, abilities can only be unlocked by hunting down books of knowledge that are tucked away in inconvenient places. A Viking's life is a busy one. And in between all of the pillaging and political intrigue, how does one find time to stop and smell the roses? The good news is that Assassin's Creed Valhalla is packed with so many activities and diversions that it would almost be easier to list what you can't do, like fly or drive a car. The game's playable maps, England and Norway, are chock full of opportunities to find crafting materials, seek out hidden caches of loot, hunt down long-abandoned assassin hideouts, raid tombs, hunt animals for sport and profit, play drinking games, bet on Orlog matches, and engage in flighting, which are essentially Viking rap battles. Of these diversions, Orlog is my most favorite to play. It's kind of like a dice-based iteration of Hearthstone where two players attempt to reduce each other's hit points by strategizing dice rolls that can attack, defend, and bestow tokens that activate unique abilities, like doubling damage or removing dice from play. Drinking games, flighting, and Orlog are typically found within encampments and larger settlements, but when you head out into the wilds, you're more likely to come across world events. Think of these as the random events you'd find in Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2. short encounters that involve people looking to you for a little bit of extra help. World events, oddly enough, are a considerable source of comedy. I don't equate Assassin's Creed with humor outside of a few small character moments, so to sit and watch as Ivor gets up into some shenanigans with random people is a little jarring. World events had me meeting a Viking with an axe sticking out of his head, helping an old man toss precious belongings off a cliff, assisting a pair of bumbling brothers desperate to try to make a name for themselves, and hanging out with a talking elk during a hallucinogenic stupor. One event in particular simply involved me running after a cat for a few seconds. Because of their levity and brevity, world events are a nice break from the game's more serious experiences. Exercising your right to roam yields wealth and resources that are needed to grow your clan's settlement, Ravensthorpe. Much like the homestead in Assassin's Creed 3, investing in its growth yields handsome bonuses in the form of useful trade services. Building a blacksmith shop, for example, makes it possible to greatly enhance weapons, while setting up a trading post lets you engage in hunting legendary creatures. Valhalla gives you the freedom to purchase cosmetics from vendors to give your settlement a little extra style with decorative add-ons like statues, wooden sculptures, and trophies. Expanding Ravensthorpe doesn't come cheap and requires a substantial amount of supplies which can only be acquired by raiding monasteries. One of my biggest grievances with Assassin's Creed Odyssey was the unshakable feeling that the conquest battles were mostly pointless. Aside from being forced into them by the story or grinding experience or to lure out a cultist, conquest battles never really mattered in the grand scheme of things. Valhalla solved that problem by making raids an essential part of maintaining the settlement, because monasteries hold large amounts of supplies that can't be found anywhere else. Triggering a raid is easy enough. Either approach the area by boat or wander onto the grounds and blast a horn. Either method will trigger a full-on assault on the monastery as Vikings battle Saxons and leave civilians to flee in terror. Completing a raid involves tracking down supply caches spread out across the area, and once the last cache has been collected, the raid ends and you're free to return home and spend your ill-gotten materials. There is a lot going on in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and for the most part, all of it is pretty great. The gameplay is solid and responsive enough, but from time to time I felt like I experienced some typical open-world jank. Ivor, like Cassandra and Bayek before her, is capable of climbing any surface, but between Norway's craggy mountains and England's stone ruins, climbing on and around various structures can sometimes cause the character to move in directions you didn't want them to go. This is especially noticeable when you're chasing after floating pages, a la Black Flag, and I often felt frustrated watching Ivor behave in ways I didn't want nor expect. Another annoying issue I felt needs to be addressed is the practice of marking targets during assaults on enemy strongholds. Because there's so much going on when the fighting starts, unending streams of enemies and smoke making it difficult to see, it can be hard to track down enemies during the melee. The aforementioned pinging system is the best way to identify targets, but the range only goes so far, leaving me to run around the area in a desperate hunt for the remaining soldiers. Exploration and world building is something that the previous New Creed games have done really well, and Valhalla is no different. Late 800s England might not be as visually diverse as Egypt or Greece, but that doesn't stop it from being a beautiful, vibrant place. Although there are still supernatural elements that permeate just below the surface, your adventures feel grounded in reality and less fantastical as you assist clans in court intrigue, hostile takeovers, and political marriages. I was really looking forward to seeing how the game performed on my new 4K TV, and since this was the first game I got to play with HDR settings, there were moments when the game stole my breath away. That also meant I got a much clearer picture of the game's rather brutal violence. For a series defined by stabbing people in the throat with a hidden blade, Valhalla is the most over the top. I have no problem with that because the spectacle of seeing arms, heads, and legs get lopped off aligns quite well with the already gritty nature of combat. Funnily enough, the only bit of violence I had a problem with were the short cutscenes that trigger once you've assassinated a mission-critical target. Before you engage in a final conversation, which allows these figures to get caught up in monologuing, you're treated to a random video that looks like something out of Mortal Kombat as the hidden blade penetrates the victim's body, tearing its way through bone and muscle to pierce soft, squishy organs. Ugh. Thankfully, this is something you can turn off within the game's massive catalog of accessibility options. Like its new Creed predecessors, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is an epic adventure that benefits from a startling new direction in design and function. Because of its larger scope, you're no longer living inside a small narrative bubble and shaping the world around you. Instead, Ivor, Bayek, and Cassandra are small but important cogs that help turn the wheel of civilization by helping others influence history. You've done this twice though, and Ubisoft asks you to do it all again. Valhalla is equipped with a number of mechanics and gameplay systems that clearly echo the last two games, and while it makes some positive tweaks and light refinements to them, overall the experience is overly familiar by now. Still, what Valhalla lacks in originality, the visceral and fun combat makes up the deficit, and that speaks volumes to me given that Assassin's Creed never found its footing in this area. Packed with enough content on the disc and planned future DLC, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is another hefty and captivating entry in Ubisoft's long-running historical franchise. DarkStation gives Assassin's Creed Valhalla 4.5 stars.
I'm beginning to wonder if it is a man or a god beneath all that armor.
A man of God stands before you, Eva, proud and resolute.
That's Burgred's war thane. Killed a dozen of our men in an ambush along the River Trent. It was Ivar's axe that stopped him.
That is a poor description of a perfect 30-yard toss.
Enough jawing, heathens!